Oh, glory to God. May God bless you greatly at this hour in the name of Jesus, and may the eternal God of glory bless your life and your family in the name of Jesus. Beloved brother and sister, today I bring you spiritual content on this edification platform for your life. It is the testimony of Minister Emma Kingdom. It is truly a very powerful testimony because it reveals to us the 7 levels of spiritual warfare. This minister reveals to us how to access high-level spiritual warfare and how to go through each of the levels of spiritual warfare until reaching the 7th level and obtaining victory. This minister truly reveals to us how to fight silently and raw with authority, how to break covenants, how to cancel covenants, how to seal territories, take cities in the Spirit, how to be covered with the blood of Christ, the power of the name of Jesus, the support of the heavenly armies. This testimony is truly very powerful, and it's more than a testimony it's a spiritual key. It's a spiritual activation for spiritual warfare. I suggest you listen to it until the end. If it's sacred, please like it, share it, and let me know at the end of the broadcast if the testimony was a blessing for your life. In the mighty name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Testimony, the 7 levels of spiritual warfare. I will never forget that night in 2003. The silence in my room was absolute, but something roared inside me. A weight on my chest made it impossible to breathe. An invisible shadow oppressed me as if it had declared war on my soul. I didn't understand it then, but I was taking my first steps in the first level of spiritual warfare called awakening. Suddenly, fleeting images crossed my mind, memories of past guilt, voices accusing me, dark thoughts screaming at me, "You are not worthy, you are nothing." And there, in that darkness, I discovered that the battle wasn't with flesh and blood, but with forces I couldn't see, that it was the day I knew my life would never be the same again. The following years were a constant battlefield. I remember the year 2006, I fell into an emotional abyss. My mind was a prison bombarded by fears, doubts, and temptations. Every morning I woke up with an unbearable weight. Would this be the day I finally gave up? It was then I understood that the mind is the first front in spiritual warfare. Every thought was a dart, every lie a chain. There were nights I would look in the mirror and barely recognize the person in front of me. I felt torn, trapped between what I knew I should be and what the enemy whispered to me. There I learned that prayer wasn't an empty ritual, it was a battle cry. The year 2010 marked an unexpected turn. My dreams became trenches. Entire nights would pass. I would struggle against shadows, giant snakes, and deformed faces that chased me. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart beating like a war drum. At first, I thought they were simply nightmares caused by stress, but I soon realized they were open doors to the spiritual world. Each image was a warning, each pursuit a message. There were forces that wanted to break my destiny before SH even understood my purpose. It was during that time that I heard the clearest voice I had ever heard inside me. Don't run away, fight. By 2013, things were no longer just spiritual. People close to me began to turn against me for no apparent reason. Long-standing friendships turned into enemies. Co-workers conspired against me and my family. Petty arguments erupted. They turned into fires. I felt as if an invisible army was using those I loved as pawns on a macabre board. I cried, I screamed, but I realized something shocking. The enemy doesn't always appear as a monster in dreams. Sometimes it disguises itself in hurtful words, in unexpected betrayals, in the cold gaze of someone who once hugged you. That year one learned that spiritual warfare is also waged in everyday life, in the places where you least expect it. When I felt I couldn't take it anymore, a revelation came. One morning, while reading the scriptures, each word seemed like fire burning in my bones. I realized I couldn't face this war on my own strength. I needed the full armor of God, truth, justice, faith, salvation, the word, and prayer. I remember closing my eyes and saying through tears, "If this war is inevitable, I don't want to run away anymore. Teach me how to fight." And in that very instant, something changed. The attacks didn't disappear, the storm didn't cease, but a warrior was born inside me. The battles were just beginning. and I was ready to cross the threshold into the second level of spiritual warfare. 2016 was the year one discovered that the worst wasn't what came from outside, but what was settling in. Spiritual oppression enveloped me like a dark cloak. I woke up tired, even though I had slept for 8 hours. I walked among people like a ghost, with no energy, no desire. The voices in my head not only accused me, but now they urged me to give up. It's not worth it, let it all go, let go. It was as if my very soul was being slowly squeezed out. There were nights when I cried silently, convinced that no one would understand the invisible weight suffocating me. That year one learned that oppression isn't overcome with human strength, it's overcome with resistance, with worship in the midst of darkness. In 2017, something even more terrifying arrived: confusion. People who spoke of faith, who appeared to be guides, began to introduce subtle doubts, twisted doctrines, and empty promises. Their tone was sweet, but something inside me trembled. I realized that I was facing spiritual deception, one of the most lethal weapons. The enemy doesn't always roar like a lion, sometimes he whispers like a friend, and that disguise was what almost made me fall. I remember early morning, kneeling, crying out from the depths of my being, "Show me the truth, don't let me get lost." And in that cry, I understood that the truth is not negotiable. It doesn't accommodate itself. The truth is a sword and cuts hard through every veil of lies. Entering the third level, in 2018, I will never forget that year. My health began to fail without explanation. Sudden pain, uncertain diagnoses, doctors saying, "We couldn't find anything." It was as if my body had become a physical battlefield where every cell screamed in agony. There were days when I could barely get out of bed. My skin tingled as if fire were coursing through my veins. I understood that I was under a direct attack, a siege on my flesh. It wasn't just discomfort, it was a strategy to stop me, to paralyze me. In the midst of pain, I discovered that every wound was an opportunity to depend more deeply on God, and it was in that fragility that I began to see the glory of resilience. All of this led me to the driest place, the spiritual desert. I no longer heard anything, no dreams, no visions, no whispers. The silence was sepulchral. I walked as if God himself had hidden his face from me. It was a drought that devoured my prayers, a void that turned my days into dust. And there, in that nothingness, I learned something brutally honest. Silence is also part of war. Not everything is thunder. Sometimes the enemy wants you to believe you've been abandoned. But while I thought I was alone, I discovered that every step in that desert was strengthening my feet to walk on burning embers. I remember 2020 arriving like a hurricane. It wasn't the enemy outside, it wasn't shadows or dreams, it was in my own home where the war broke out. Family conflicts erupted out of nowhere, hurtful words, distance, a closed door. It was as if hell had decided to take up residence in my living room. I remember one night sitting in the dark, watching my family divided and feeling everything I loved crumble before my eyes. I screamed at the ceiling, "Enough, I will not allow destruction to have the last word in my house." That was the moment I understood that the spiritual war wasn't just for me, it was for my people, for entire generations, and that certainty lit a fire that neither pain, nor fear, nor chaos could extinguish. I remember a year that tore me in two. 2021, I had fought so many battles, but nothing prepared me for the deep despair that hit me. It was as if a door had opened inside me, and dark thoughts I'd never faced before poured in. I didn't want to get out of bed, I didn't want to pray, I didn't want anything. I wondered if all this fighting made sense, if the enemy had already defeated me without me noticing. I felt the weight of an invisible slab pushing me toward total surrender. One night, on the verge of collapse, I heard a whisper inside me, "If you've come this far, because you haven't fallen yet, hold on." And I understood that despair wasn't the end, it was the gateway to a higher level of spiritual warfare. As the years passed, it brought with it manifestations I never thought I'd experience, objects falling only in my room, strange noises at midnight, shadows moving down the hall when I was alone. At first, I thought they were hallucinations, but one morning, while I was praying, a shadow stopped in front of my bed. I felt a penetrating cold, a hatred that was beyond human understanding. My body trembled, but from deep within, I cried out. The blood of Christ has power, and in that instant, the shadow vanished like smoke. That encounter taught me that the enemy may roar loudly, but he doesn't have the last word. It was the beginning of a head-on level of direct confrontation with forces that don't hide. That same year, I discovered that every victory came at a price. Resistance was costing me relationships, opportunities, even financial stability. It was as if the enemy were taking away everything I valued piece by piece. Friends drifted away, jobs closed, and I found myself counting coins, wondering how I would survive the next month. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a strategy of attrition, taking away the worldly to make me let go of the spiritual. But in the midst of loss, I learned a harsh and powerful truth. What the enemy takes away in the visible, God multiplies in the invisible, and that discovery sustained me in the void. However, the war changed its face. It wasn't just about me, but about my lineage. I began to notice family patterns. Chains of addictions, repeated divorces, illnesses that were inherited like silent curses. It was as if the enemy had written a script for my blood, and I was just another actor in that dark play. That revelation broke my heart. I understood that if I didn't fight firmly, my children and my children's children would live the same chains as me. One night, with tears in my eyes, I raised my hands and declared, "This is the end. With me it breaks, the curse, and a new story begins for those who come after." It was then that I understood that spiritual warfare is not individual, it is generational. At the third level, spiritual warfare was an open confrontation against powers. This time, it wasn't just thoughts, shadows, or losses, they were simultaneous attacks that pounded my mind, my body, and my environment like a synchronized army. I felt like I was inside a spiritual fire. While I tried to put out a fire in one area, another ignited in another. There were days when everything seemed to collapse at once. But amid the chaos, I discovered that a greater fire was burning inside me. That year, I understood what it means to live by the word. He who is in me is stronger than he who is in the world. And although the enemy roared with fury, I was no longer the same victim as in the past. I have been born a warrior, ready to fight until my last breath. But just as I thought I had gained ground, I discovered something terrifying. I was still bound by invisible chains. They were habits, repetitive thoughts, unhealed wounds that dragged me down like heavy shackles. These weren't external demons, but internal prisons, an old resentment, a hidden guilt, a childhood fear. All of this rose up against me, and it was then that I understood that spiritual warfare is also fought in the depths of our hearts. One morning I fell to my knees, beating the ground with my fists, shouting, "Free me, break what still binds me." And although the chains didn't break in an instant, that cry marked the beginning of a liberation that would be slow but definitive. I remember that same year, I experienced the most painful blow. The betrayal of someone I trusted completely. It wasn't a stranger, it was a brother in the faith, someone who had walked with me, someone who knew my deepest wounds. His betrayal was a knife that stabbed into the innermost core of my being. It didn't just hurt me, it broke me, and the enemy used it like poison. Look, not even your own are faithful. You are alone. That it was the most visceral battle. Forgiveness seemed impossible, but I understood that harboring hatred meant opening a chamber in my soul to the enemy. Crying, through gritted teeth, I said, "I forgive him even if my heart bleeds." And there I felt a brutal relief, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had been lifted. Entering the fourth level, the confrontation became territorial. The war escalated even further. I began to notice that it wasn't just my personal struggles, but that there were ties in the city itself, places where violence was constant, entire neighborhoods dominated by darkness. One night, as I walked down an abandoned street, I felt the oppression in the air. It was as if the atmosphere breathed hostility. Then I understood, spirits don't just attack people, they also control territories. That revelation prompted me to pray not only for myself, but for streets, communities, and nations. The battlefield was expanding, and I had to expand with it. I discovered that spiritual warfare is much bigger than I had imagined. I remember the night of my brokenness. There was a moment I will never forget. I was in the middle of a time of fasting and prayer, seeking strength, when suddenly I felt the heavens themselves close in. My knees were shaking, my tears were falling like rivers, and an unbearable pain pierced my spirit. It was total brokenness. I couldn't speak, only sob, and in that absolute darkness, I heard a firm voice inside me, "Your strength is not enough, only in your weakness is my power perfected." I came to understand that the true war is not about proving how strong I am, but about recognizing how dependent I must be. The brokenness didn't destroy me, it transformed me. After that night, something changed. I was no longer the same. My once fearful spirit began to roar with a strength I had never known. Prayers were no longer timid whispers, they were battle cries that shook the air. I remember waking up one morning, opening the windows, and declaring in a firm voice, "This territory does not belong to darkness, it belongs to light." I felt a force course through my body like fire in my veins. That was the sign that I was entering the 5th level of spiritual warfare, where I was no longer just a victim of attack, but a warrior advancing, attacking, conquering territory. That was the year one stopped running away and began to fight back. For so long I had been on the defensive, resisting blows, dodging attacks, but now my spirit was burning, and every prayer was an arrow, every word a sword. I remember the early morning I got out of bed, tired of feeling the oppression in my house. I walked from room to room declaring, "There is no place for darkness here, this is holy territory." I felt as if something invisible was retreating, as if the enemy was choosing and hiding from the light. That was the beginning of my awakening as a warrior, not just to resist, but to conquer. As I advanced in battle, I began to notice strange signs in my surroundings, interrupted conversations, sudden accidents, thoughts filled with hatred from people I didn't even know. It was as if the enemy left visible traces of his fury. His fury, a tremendous fury, directed at my resistance. One afternoon, as I was leaving home, I found a strange figure painted on the wall in my neighborhood. It wasn't simple graffiti, there was something in that symbol that tickled my skin. I understood I had entered a realm of open confrontation, where even the physical was used as a warning. That day, the day I promised myself not to retreat, if the enemy wanted to mark territory, I would mark it with my faith. I remember one of my prayer vigils. I found myself alone in an empty church. The dawn was freezing, and my words seemed to fade into nothingness, but I continued praying, shouting, pleading. Suddenly I felt that the echo of my voice wasn't just bouncing off the walls, it was a spiritual shock. Every declaration was a blow, every cry an invisible earthquake. There I understood that even if I don't see it, the word that comes out of my mouth in faith becomes a weapon that shakes heaven and earth. The void wasn't such, it was the invisible battlefield responding. However, one October night, I had a vision of an immense wall built of dark stone, standing between me and my destiny. At the top of the wall were figures, watching me, mocking me, shouting, "You will never pass." I knelt broken, but a force propelled me to rise, and a shining sword appeared in my hands, and as I thrust it against the wall, it began to crack. I awoke from the vision sweating, my heart racing. That experience revealed to me that every physical obstacle I see has a spiritual reflection, and even if it seems indestructible, every wall can fall. From that day on, I no longer saw myself as a victim. There were scars on my spirit, but each one was proof that I had survived battles that could have destroyed me. I began to walk with a new conviction. It wasn't arrogance, it was authority, the authority born of pain, pierced by the tears shed from the invisible blood that stained my nights. I knew I was advancing to the 6th level of spiritual warfare, and that level isn't reached by chance, it's reached when you've been tested by fire and still remain standing. I remember when I entered the threshold of the 6th level, I remember that night was a different dawn. From the first days, I felt that something had changed in the air. The war was no longer just against shadows, thoughts, or territory. Now it was a direct confrontation with high-ranking powers. I knew this because the attacks became more coordinated, more precise. If I strengthened myself in one area, a blow immediately arose in another. It was as if a higher power had sent clear orders against me, and although my spirit burned, I also knew I was crossing a dangerous threshold, the 6th level of spiritual warfare, where there is no room for half measures. Either you surrender completely to Christ or you perish. I remember a week in March that marked me forever. Every night at exactly 3 a.m., I woke up with a start. An immense weight sat on my chest as if someone invisible was trying to suffocate me. I struggled to breathe, and with what little voice I had left, I managed to speak. But at dawn, fear returned, and what if the next time I couldn't resist? That experience taught me that the battle at the 6th level isn't random, it's an organized siege that seeks to wear down even the strongest faith. Likewise, one of the enemy's most subtle battles and weapons at this level wasn't violence, but temptation. I remember being presented with golden opportunities, easy deals, open doors that promised wealth and prestige. Everything seemed legitimate. But my spirit felt a hidden poison. It was like bitter honey, shiny on the outside, rotten on the inside. I remembered that not all blessings come from the light, and I understood that at this level, the enemy doesn't always want to destroy you. Sometimes, he wants to buy you, seduce you, and distract you from your eternal purpose. However, during a vigil, I had a vision. I saw myself in the middle of an immense battlefield. There were armies clashing, and I was in the middle, armed but tired. Before me appeared a giant in black armor, whose gaze pierced me with hatred. I wanted to retreat, but a voice from above said, "Don't retreat, you are in your battle, this is your battle, raise your sword." Raise my trembling sword. I raised it and advanced toward him. I don't remember how the vision ended, only that I woke up with my hands burning as if I had wielded a real sword. That day I understood that the 6th level isn't theoretical, it's a direct confrontation with powers that seek to break you at any cost. I remember one of the wounds I suffered a severe fall, not physical, but spiritual. I felt I had failed, that the weight of war had crushed me. I wept with rage, with helplessness. I convinced myself that I had disappointed God, but in that same brokenness, something happened. As I wept, I felt an invisible hand rest on my shoulder and a voice say, "My power is perfected in your weakness." That wound, far from destroying me, became the channel through which a new anointing flowed. I understood that at the 6th level, falls are not the end, they are the crucible where true authority is formed. As time passed, one morning while I was praying alone, I heard a crash that shook my spirit. It wasn't ordinary thunder. It was as if heaven itself were roaring over my house. I felt a tremor that forced me to my knees. It was a warning. The battle was intensifying in the air. It wasn't imagination, it wasn't a symbol, it was an open war raged above my head. The roars didn't come to frighten me, but to remind me that the conflict wasn't mine alone. It was connected to a larger struggle, a heavenly confrontation where I was just another soldier, but a necessary one, and that's how I suffered the attack on my faith. That same month, I faced one of the cruelest blows, doubt. It wasn't physical, it wasn't emotional, it was a direct stab at my faith. Worship seemed to bounce off the ceiling, every promise sounded like a lie. The enemy whispered, "This is all in vain, no one is listening." It was a slow poison that ate away from within. I felt my faith teeter on the brink of extinction, and in that abyss, a spark ignited. Even if I don't see, even if I don't feel, I believe. That weak declaration, made with a broken voice, was enough to keep the flame alive. I remember one October night, I had an even clearer vision than the one before. I once again found myself before the black-armored giant. This time his laughter was heartbreaking, and I felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. Every step he took made the ground shake beneath my feet. I trembled, but I remembered what I had learned. I couldn't back down. I raised the sword of faith and advanced. The impact was brutal. Every blow made my body burn. Each impact was like a lightning bolt piercing me, but in the midst of the pain, I cried out, "I don't fight with my strength, I fight in the name of the Almighty." At that instant, the giant retreated. I hadn't defeated him yet, but I managed to make him take a step back, and that step was my victory at that moment. The price of facing powers was loneliness. Many around me didn't understand what I was going through. They said, "You're exaggerating, it's all in your head." Others walked away. Tired of my constant struggles, I found myself alone, kneeling in a dark room, with no company but my tears. At first, that loneliness tore me apart, but later I understood that it was also training. A warrior must learn to fight even when there is no one to applaud his victory. I loved that loneliness, and in that loneliness, I discovered the most powerful companionship. I was not alone, I had never been. After months of spiritual turmoil, I had an experience that marked my life. During a deep prayer, I felt a fire descend upon me. It wasn't a fire that burned, it was a fire that spread. I closed my eyes and saw a mark on my forehead, an invisible sign that was not for men, but for the spiritual world. It was the seal of the tested warrior, a mark that declared, "This one has resisted, this one has remained, this one does not bend." That day I understood that I had survived the 6th level, not because I was strong, but because in every fall, in every cry, in every wound, God had sustained me, and although the enemy continued to roar, I was prepared for the 7th and final level of spiritual warfare. I remember an indescribable feeling beginning. It wasn't oppression, it wasn't an attack, it was total war. Everything around me seemed to shake, my dreams were filled with apocalyptic symbols, my days were a field of constant resistance. I understood that I had reached the 7th level of spiritual warfare. This is no longer about simple individual battles, it is the final confrontation where eternal purpose is at stake. I felt that every step I took reverberated beyond my lifetime, every decision was a blow that resonated for generations. The weight was unbearable, but within me burned a certainty, I had come too far to turn back. I remember having a shocking vision. I was standing in a dark valley, surrounded by thousands of warriors dressed in shining armor. He didn't know them, but he knew he wasn't alone. I heard a powerful voice saying, "This is the army of those who have resisted to the end. You fight with them, not against them." That revelation shook me. For years, I had believed the war was mine alone, but now I understood I was part of something immense, an invisible army fighting in every corner of the world, and that certainty gave me new strength to resist what was coming. That same year, in April, I received a blow that almost destroyed me. It wasn't physical, it was spiritual, but so real that I felt it in my body. During an intense prayer, I suddenly fell to the ground, limp, as if I had been pierced with a spear. I screamed and wept, convinced it was the end. Everything went dark, and for a moment, I thought I had lost the battle, but in the midst of that darkness, I heard a firm voice, "This is not your end, it is your test." I got up, staggering, but with a new determination. Even wounded, I would continue fighting, because a warrior truth is not defined by not falling, but by rising even with blood on your hands, according to Don Frenti. The most brutal thing I had ever seen, they weren't shadows or giants, they were principalities, entities of power that manifested themselves in visions and synchronized attacks against everything I was. I felt it in my thoughts, in my dreams, in my body. Every day was a different assault, as if an organized force wanted to erase me from the spiritual map. But I also discovered something. The authority I had gained in past battles allowed me to resist. I couldn't defeat them with empty shouts, but with the authority of someone who has been broken and rebuilt again and again. After months of fighting, a strange silence arrived. It wasn't peace, it was the tense calm before the storm. I would wake up in the early morning and everything was still, too still. That silence made me nervous. I felt like something gigantic was about to be unleashed, like a final battle that would decide not only my fate, but that of many. It was in those days that I understood that the 7th level isn't just about fighting, it's about being willing to give up everything, even your life, in order to fulfill your eternal purpose. Then, finally, that night, the sky turned red in my dreams. The wind blew like a hurricane, and in the distance, screams, wails, and the clash of invisible swords could be heard. I woke up with my heart beating like a war drum. The storm had begun, everything accelerated. Problems in my family, attacks on my health, financial losses. It was as if hell had signed a pact to destroy me in a single blow. The 7th level isn't gradual, it's brutal, total, and merciless. I felt like I was in the middle of a battlefield where everything I loved was a target, and I had to resist even if everything collapsed. I remember, during a lonely vigil, having a chilling vision. I was walking through a valley filled with dry bones, and suddenly those bones began to rise. They weren't armies of life, they were specters of my past, sins, mistakes, betrayals, guilt. They all screamed my name, accusing me. Never, you will be free, you will never be worthy. Their voices were a chorus of condemnation. I fell to the ground, covering my ears, crying in despair. But then I remembered. The blood shed for me had silenced all accusations. I screamed with all my might, I have been redeemed, they will condemn me no more. And in that instant, the ghosts vanished like smoke. That same month, I understood with pain, the 7th level demands everything. I lost friends, I lost comforts, I even lost the tranquility I once knew. It was a total stripping, a devastation. There were nights when I wondered if it was worth so much sacrifice. What was the point of losing everything? And the answer came clearly, nothing I give up is lost, everything is the seed of a greater victory. I understood that the price of the 7th level is high, but not unfair, because what is gained is incomparably greater than what is left behind. I remember having a more terrifying vision of my life. I saw a gigantic dragon with black wings that covered the sky. Its breath was like fire, and every roar shook the ground beneath my feet. I tried to flee, but my legs wouldn't respond. The dragon advanced toward me with pure hatred in its eyes. I felt it was the end. I closed my eyes and screamed, not with my strength, but with the power of the Almighty. When I opened my eyes, the dragon stopped, retreated, and disappeared like smoke. I woke up bathed in sweat, knowing I had faced a principality of apocalyptic proportions, and although I didn't defeat it, I survived the encounter. After that vision, a strange silence came. It was no longer the calm before the storm, it was a silence filled with victory. There were no trumpets, no celebrations, only a profound peace, as if something in the heavens had been decided in my favor. I understood that not all victories are visible, some are fought in the invisible, and even if nothing changes in the human realm, in the eternal realm the enemy has been defeated. That day, I knelt, raised my hands, and wept, not from pain, but from gratitude. The 7th level hadn't ended, but I knew I had already tasted a foretaste of what it means to triumph spiritually. I remember when I was on a spiritual retreat surrounded by silence, seeking strength, when I suddenly felt a sudden attack. It wasn't physical, but the air became so heavy I could barely breathe. Suddenly, thoughts that weren't mine came to me. Give up, you're no good, you can't take it anymore. It was as if 1,000 voices were surrounding me, trampling me. I fell to my knees. Weakly, but I managed to whisper, I won't give up, not today. And with that weak declaration, the voices faded. I learned that at the 7th level, the enemy doesn't hit you head-on. He ambushes you, seeking to break your mind at your moment of greatest vulnerability. In November, I began a radical fast. I wanted clarity, I wanted direction. During those days, my body trembled with hunger, my skin dried, my hands grew cold, but in the midst of that fragility, I saw a vision. My spirit burned with fire, and chains were melting in my hands. I understood that fasting wasn't just a discipline, it was a weapon of war. At the 7th level, each sacrifice opens a breach in the heavens, and as my flesh weakened, my spirit became a hammer against the darkness. I remember in December of that year, when I thought I had endured everything, the most devastating blow came. Someone I had discipled, someone I considered a spiritual son, rose up against me, accused me, slandered me, pointed the finger at me with lies that pierced like daggers. This wasn't a distant enemy, it was someone who knew my secret, my struggle, my tears. That betrayal almost broke me, but I remembered, the master was also betrayed with a kiss, and I understood that at the 7th level, even betrayal is part of the crucible that purifies the warrior. I remember a New Year's Eve, I had a dream that seemed real. I saw a sky divided into two, one side filled with light and the other covered in shadows. Angels and demons clashed furiously, swords against spears, screams against roars. In the midst of that battle, I saw my name written in a shining book. Every time I resisted on earth, my name shone brighter on that page. Every time I almost fell, the light dimmed a little.